Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I wanted to talk about Greater China's evolving participation in the global IP ecosystem, and talk about how that's done, what kind of organizations, what kind of trade-offs and accommodations are made in order to support patent non-aggression, freedom of action, particularly in software. Over the last 30 plus years, a new global dynamic has evolved where every electronic touch that we have is pretty much enabled by software and by open source software in particular, whether it be searches that are done by Google through Google or other applications, self-driving vehicle, autonomous driving platforms like Apollo that Baidu has authored, trades on the New York and other stock exchanges around the world, the use of social networking, ATM machines, all transactions through QR code point of sale purchases through mobile phone utilization, even people who have iOS phones. Those phones run a significant amount of open source code, even if they don't run on the Linux platform in the way that the most popular platform in the world does, Android. Chromebooks, mobile applications, the cloud, the stoplights that we cross at, air traffic control systems. As I said, every electronic touch is enabled. Even if we don't feel it, it's enabled by open source. And then the world has seen a change over the last 30 years, and the ascendancy of software, and no company 5 years from now will feel comfortable defining itself as a hardware company because of the ascendancy of software and the differentiation that comes from it. And what we're seeing is a model that open source ushers in, which is of collaborative development, where 1 + 1 + 1 doesn't equal 3, but it equals 6 or 10 or 20. When smart people to get together and solve problems in software collaboratively from all parts of the world because of the open, collaborative, participative model, and the end of silos, where only one company can produce so much innovation, but tens of thousands of companies and individuals can produce so much more innovation in faster and more rapid cycle times. That contributor diversity is critical to being able to distill the collective intelligence of an entire population of creatives that participate in software development. And so you get higher levels of innovation results, and those higher levels of innovation are typically teased out through projects. Individuals and companies of all size come together through entities like Linux Foundation, Apache, and other project management organizations to innovate together. Automotive grade Linux, obviously, is an example in the auto space. The OPNFV and a number of other networking projects bring together carriers and equipment suppliers. The drone code project, Cloud Foundry. There are literally hundreds of projects in addition to the most significant open source project, Linux, that are managed by the Linux Foundation, and, as I said, other organizations that are out there that support cutting edge technology through collaborative development. This notion of collaboration, cooperation is something that really comes to us from game theory, and the idea of co-opetition in software and hardware it's kind of embodied in the modality that drives open source development. Is a new patent strategies are being developed because companies are accommodating the fact that there's openness and there's proprietary, that we make decisions as the stewards of intellectual capital inside a company as to what should be protected and what can be a source of differentiation. and what is really core that we need to build on. And so these projects that I referenced earlier and many, many hundreds of others are producing core technology that then gets adopted by individual companies. And they want to be able to, when they adopt this code to be able to build products, they want to be sure that there's freedom of action and freedom to operate, and they're not going to be sued for adopting open source code. That's one of the basic tenets of project development, is that the core code that's produced, everybody wants to be able to use without fear of litigation. And that inventing activity moves much higher up in the stack to the application layer. And that's where differentiation occurs, not in core functionality that's produced by collaborative projects from open source. And so this is one of the key and important functions, is simply stated, where we collaborate, where we build on each other's ideas, and where innovation occurs lower in the stack. We want to be able to feel free of litigation. Higher in the stack is where we differentiate. And so it's very much a world of this cooperative world, is a world where we collaborate to compete more effectively. We collaborate to innovate at higher levels. And then we adopt and implement code in ways that we feel are consistent with the products we want to be able to introduce into the marketplace. And that's really the model that companies and individuals, small groups, garage startups, all manner of entities are adopting this code and cooperating with others, from the largest companies in the world to the smallest companies in the world, are collaborating together to produce new novelty. And this doesn't mean that, as I said earlier, the demise of intellectual property. Rather, it means that there's a form of practice duality, where there's open and closed or coexisting, open and proprietary or coexisting, and people are making decisions around where they're going to innovate, how they're going to innovate, and patents are being used in a more thoughtful, constructive way, and providing for collaborative technology development on the one hand, but collaborative community-based solutions to mitigate patent risk and ensure that this idea of freedom in the core to adopt and implement is sustained. There are many different organizations that are offering kind of the opportunity for patent non-aggression to occur. Open Invention Network is the oldest of these and has really set the tone, as it was designed to support freedom of action and freedom to operate in the core in open source in particular. The other solutions, such as RPX, Allied Security Trust, Unified Patents, Lot Network, are all interesting and important complementary solutions to Open Invention Network for companies that want to avoid privateering, by companies that sell their patents to third parties and then participate in aggressive licensing, or companies that just want to remove patent risk like in Unified Patents case, to be able to eliminate patent risk from poor quality patents, or to work against patent trolls, patent assertion entities in creative ways, the way RPX and AST do. OIN, I'll talk about now, was formed in 2005. IBM, Red Hat, Novell, Sony, NEC, and Philips got together and were later joined by Google and Toyota to be the funding members, the companies that recognize the paternalistic need to reduce risk in open source in order to spur more adoption and innovation. And right now, OIN has grown into the largest patent non-aggression community in the history of the technology world, with over 3,200 members from startups to large corporations. There are 3 million patents owned and applications owned by OIN licensees. All of them are exposed to a cross-license that is defined by a scope that's developed through something called the Linux System Definition, which represents core software packages from various open source projects. which again provide the scope of the obligation of the cross-license pool and determines which patents from the 3 million that are owned by current licensees are subject to the actual cross-license. The OIN also owns patents and applications. It has over 1,300 patents and applications, and it has spent in excess of $100 million acquiring these patents, which are used for defensive purposes. And there are 2,800 plus packages that currently make up the Linux system definition, but I'll talk a little bit more about this as I go forward. It's interesting that we set out with a goal to be from our founding, to be very much a global organization. And we're very pleased that we are very much global. North America represents 24%. While we may have been founded in North America, we have a very much balance around the world, 18% from South and Central America. Asia Pacific has 23% of our representation, and European, Middle East, Africa, 35%. And so these 3,200 companies are spread quite evenly around the world because the global footprint of open source is very much spread around the world. So we're very proud of the adoption around the world, particularly in Asia Pacific over the last 8 to 10 years. The most significant growth for us has really come in Asia Pacific and to a lesser extent in Latin America. When we look at Greater China, we see that particularly in mainland China, that there was a shift that occurred in 2015, where companies started participating much more aggressively in open source projects. And when companies participate in open source projects, in short order, they typically start to look for solutions that insulate them from risk from a patent standpoint. And OIN becomes the de facto choice for those companies to participate in, to be able to provide the patent risk mitigation that the permissive licenses under which most open source projects have been done in the last 10 years or so don't provide, but OIN does provide. So it's a natural complement to anyone who's actively participating and utilizing open source code. And so while Huawei and a handful of other Chinese companies have been very active since the beginning of this past decade in open source participation, project participation, utilization of open source code. For many other companies, it's really happened during that 2015 timeframe when government support started to become more active and visible, and broad participation in open source projects became more significant. If you look at the growth in Greater China, OIN and participation in open source projects during the period, we see many companies that are household names, not only in Greater China but around the world, that have become significant participants in the community. This is member representation by the industry or segment. You see, again, a whole host is just a representative sample, but you see Alibaba, you see Microsoft, you see some of the most significant companies in the world: Facebook, Baidu, Vodafone, Rakuten, Jio. I mean, AT&T, and in most of the major car companies in the world. Geely, which is a very active international car company, as well as having a significant footprint in Greater China. BYD, SAIC, GM. Many companies, and it's very much a global footprint. If you look at Ant Financial and Tencent, the two large shareholders, market shareholders in in mobile payments, Union Pay, which does the clearance for all of those payments on a daily basis, literally billions of transactions a day. Quite significant to see that these fintech companies are there. SMBC, Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corporation, one of the largest banks in the world and one of the 3 hyperbanks in Japan. Industrials, software is happening everywhere. Companies like Caterpillar and others listed here, you would not expect would be significant software development companies, but they truly are, as they look to integrate more software into their products. And what OIN has done, really the bottom line is that OIN has, over time, has created a patent non-aggression community and established patent non-aggression as a cultural norm in Linux and open source. The only companies that don't participate are two types of companies. One, that haven't started the movement toward software in a significant way, for one reason or another. Maybe it's their industry, like the energy sector is just starting to move in this direction. But we expect that in the next 3 to 5 years, most energy sector companies will be participating in projects, open source projects like LF Energy, and being very active participants in the open source patent non-aggression community that OIN has developed through its cross license. And the only other type of company that doesn't participate in open source or in the Linux system definition scope activity and in the OIN cross license will be companies that are antagonistic to Linux and open source and are truly seeking to reserve the right to sue on core Linux and open source functionality. That's a very few companies. When OIN was formed, it was really focused on the monolithic threat that Microsoft represented. But if you see the journey that Microsoft has made, if you follow it in the press, you look at the products and the offerings and the change in rhetoric as to how it now approaches and defines itself. If Microsoft has made this journey, there are very, very few others that can be expected to be holdouts, as Microsoft was one of the most concerned companies in the world about the evolution of open source and what it meant. And they have become an OIN licensee and are working with OIN on the establishment of the open source zone to attack poor quality patents through Unified Patents Partnership, where the Linux Foundation and IBM are also participating with OIN and Microsoft. Increasingly, Microsoft is acting in a way which is entirely supportive of community behaviors and participative in this kind of notion of this cultural norm of what it means to have an opportunity to take and contribute to open source projects and utilize open source code. They recognize that opportunity comes with an obligation, and the obligation is to utilize your patents in an appropriate way to ensure freedom of action and freedom to operate in the core. So I'd like to thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today. And I look forward to any questions that you have that I might be able to address via email or through another means provided by the conference organizers. Thank you.